Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. I know you use this video to fall asleep. If you enjoy our stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what city are you watching? I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, let's dive in. The GPS lost signal 12 miles before I reached Camp Gray Pine, but I didn't need directions. 20 years hadn't erased the muscle memory of turning left at the lightning split oak, right at the rusted mailbox reading Hendricks Farm, then straight down the gravel road until the pine trees swallowed the sky whole. My rental car's suspension groaned over familiar potholes, each jolt sending a spike of recognition through my chest. I shouldn't have come back. That was the thought circling my mind like a prayer wheel as I drove deeper into the Cascade Mountains, past the point where cell towers feared to tread. But Eleanor's letter had been waiting for me when I returned from my book tour, sitting on my kitchen counter like an accusation written in careful, shaken handwriting. Michael, it's time. They're tearing down the camp next month. If we don't do this now, we never will. I can't carry this alone anymore. Neither can you. Attached was a newspaper clipping about the demolition and something else, a photograph I'd tried so hard to forget. 7 teenagers in orange Camp Gray Pine t-shirts, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the easy confidence of immortality. I was in the center, 18 years old and lean as a whip, my arm around Sarah Kellerman's waist. She was laughing at something Tommy Valdez had just whispered, her head thrown back, dark hair catching the late afternoon sun like spun gold. Sarah had been dead for 20 years, 3 weeks, and 2 days. The trees thickened as I descended into the valley, their branches interweaving overhead until driving felt like moving through a green tunnel. The air conditioning couldn't touch the humidity here, thick and oppressive even in early October. I rolled down the windows instead, letting the forest breathe into the car. It smelled of pine needles and decay, of secrets buried too shallow to stay down. When the road curved one final time and Camp Gray Pine revealed itself, I had to pull over and grip the steering wheel to keep my hands from shaking. The camp looked exactly as I remembered it, frozen in time like a photograph left too long in the sun. The wooden sign still hung askew from its posts, paint peeling to reveal weathered timber underneath. Beyond it, the familiar cluster of cabins dotted the shoreline of Mirror Lake, their roofs green with moss and neglect. The main lodge sat hunched at the water's edge, like an old man contemplating suicide, its massive stone chimney reaching toward low-hanging clouds. But something was wrong with the light. It took me a moment to place it, this subtle wrongness that made my brain itch. Then I realized there was smoke, thin wisps rising from the chimney of the main lodge, barely visible against the overcast sky. Someone had lit a fire. My first thought was squatters. The second was Eleanor, though I'd told her I wouldn't arrive until evening. The third thought was the one that made my mouth go dry. What if it never stopped burning? I forced myself out of the car and grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk. The silence was absolute except for the whisper of wind through pine boughs and the gentle lap of lake water against the shore. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned this place, leaving behind only the memory of their songs. The gravel path to the main lodge crunched under my feet with each step, a sound that transported me instantly back to that summer when everything went wrong. I was 18 again, full of righteous fury and teenage hormones, stalking up this same path to confront Sarah about what I'd seen her doing with Danny Morrison behind the arts and crafts cabin. God, the things that had seemed important then. The lodge's front door stood open, darkness yawning beyond the threshold. I could smell the wood smoke now, rich and aromatic, threaded with something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. I called out Eleanor's name, but the sound was swallowed by the thick air. I stepped inside. The main room was exactly as I remembered. Exposed beam ceiling, fieldstone fireplace large enough to roast a pig, mismatched furniture arranged in conversation circles. Dust motes danced in the gray light filtering through grimy windows. But there was a fire crackling in the hearth, orange flames dancing over split pine logs, and sitting in a chair facing the fireplace was a figure I recognized. "Eleanor?" I ventured, though something felt off about her silhouette. She didn't turn around. Her silver hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn as camp director, her posture still ramrod straight despite her 73 years. She wore a familiar orange camp gray pine t-shirt, though it looked strangely new, the colors too bright and unfaded. "You came," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of authority that had once made 100 children snap to attention. "I wasn't sure you would. Your letter was pretty persuasive." I dropped my bag and moved closer, noting the way the firelight played across her profile. "How long have you been here?" 20 years, she said and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Give or take a few hours." The wrongness of her answer hit me like a physical blow, but before I could process it fully, she turned to face me, and I saw what the firelight had been hiding. Eleanor's face was a ruin of melted flesh and exposed bone, her eyes two black holes weeping smoke. The orange t-shirt was charred and tattered, revealing the burned landscape of her torso underneath. When she smiled, I could see straight through her cheek to the teeth embedded in her skull. "We've been waiting for you, Michael," she said in that same calm, authoritative tone. "All of us." I stumbled backward, my rational mind scrambling for purchase. Hallucination, stress reaction, too much coffee and not enough sleep during the drive. But I could smell her, the acrid stench of burned hair and cooked meat, threading through the wood smoke like a poison ribbon. "This isn't real," I whispered. Eleanor tilted her head, the motion sending a small shower of ash to the floor. "Real is a funny word, don't you think? Was Sarah real when she was screaming your name? Were the others real when they were burning? Stop. You left us here, Michael. All of us. You saved yourself and left us to burn." The fire in the hearth suddenly roared higher, bathing the room in hellish orange light. In its glow, I could see other figures arranged around the room, counselors and campers I'd tried so hard to forget, all wearing the same charred orange t-shirts, all bearing the same marks of flame and smoke. Tommy Valdez sat slouched in a corner chair, his guitar reduced to a blackened skeleton across his lap. Jenny Hartwell knelt by the coffee table, her dark hair hanging in burned wisps around a face like a Halloween mask. And there, standing by the window with her back to me, was a figure I'd see in nightmares until the day I died. Sarah turned slowly, and I saw the fire had been kinder to her than the others. Her face was mostly intact, beautiful still beneath the soot and char. Only her eyes gave away the truth. They burned with actual flames, two tiny infernos that held all the accusation in the world. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered it. "We need to talk." I ran. Dignity abandoned, rational thought suspended, I turned and bolted from that room of the living dead like the coward I'd always been. My feet skidded on the dusty wooden floor as I careened toward the open door, Eleanor's laughter echoing behind me like the crack of burning timbers. The cool evening air hit my face like a slap, shocking me back to some semblance of awareness. I reached my car in record time, fumbling with the keys until I finally got the engine started. The rational part of my mind, the part that had made me a successful writer of true crime books, was already constructing explanations. Grief-induced psychosis, carbon monoxide from an old chimney, food poisoning from that gas station burrito I'd grabbed outside Portland. But as I threw the car into reverse, my headlights swept across the lodge's front windows, and I saw them all standing there watching me. 7 figures in orange t-shirts, their burned faces pressed against the glass like children saying goodbye. I made it halfway up the gravel road before my hands started shaking so badly I couldn't steer. I pulled over next to the lightning-split oak and sat there in the growing darkness, trying to remember how to breathe. 20 years. It had been 20 years since the fire at Camp Gray Pine, and I'd spent every one of those years perfecting the art of not thinking about it. I'd built a career, a reputation, a life on the other side of the country, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the memories that lived in this valley. I'd told myself the nightmares would fade. I'd told myself the guilt would lessen. I'd told myself that what happened here was a tragedy, nothing more, and that I'd done everything I could. I'd told myself a lot of lies. The truth was simpler and infinitely more damaging. I'd been a coward then, and I was still a coward now. When the fire started in the arts and crafts cabin that night, when the wind picked up and carried the flames from building to building, I'd saved myself and no one else. I'd been the head counselor, responsible for 6 other staff members and 32 children, and when the moment came to choose between heroism and survival, I'd chosen survival every single time. 7 people had died that night, 7 people who'd trusted me to keep them safe. My phone had no signal, but the clock glowed 8:47 p.m. Full darkness had settled over the valley like a blanket, and through my windshield I could see an orange glow emanating from the camp below. Not the warm yellow of electric lights, but the angry amber of open flame. The lodge was burning again, just as it had burned 20 years ago, just as it had apparently been burning ever since. I should have left, should have turned around and driven straight back to Portland, then caught the first flight to New York and my safe, rational life full of deadlines and book signings and interviews with killers who were safely locked behind bars. Instead, I found myself turning off the engine and stepping back into the forest night. The smoke was thicker now, visible in gray ribbons threading between the pine trees. It carried the scent of burning cedar and something else. That same sweet, cloying smell I'd noticed in the lodge. My feet found the gravel path as if guided by muscle memory, carrying me back toward the camp despite every instinct screaming at me to run. The lodge was fully engulfed now, flames licking from every window, the roof crowned with fire that reached toward the low-hanging clouds. But the building wasn't being consumed. The logs remained intact, the stone chimney stood straight and true, the windows glowed but didn't break. It was burning the way things burn in dreams, endlessly, without destruction, a perpetual conflagration that existed outside the normal rules of physics. I walked closer, drawn by a fascination that overpowered my fear. The heat should have stopped me 50 feet away, but I felt nothing but the cool October air on my skin. This fire gave no warmth, cast no real light beyond the property's borders. It was a fire for the dead, burning on some frequency the living couldn't truly touch. "You came back." Sarah's voice came from directly behind me, close enough that I should have felt her breath on my neck. I turned slowly, dreading what I'd see, but she stood a respectful distance away, her burned face gentle in the firelight. She looked exactly as she had the day she died, 19 years old, beautiful despite the char, her dark eyes holding all the sadness of interrupted life. "I didn't have a choice," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You always have a choice, Michael. That's what you taught me." The accusation in her words hit harder than any scream could have. Sarah had been my responsibility that summer, a first-year counselor from Portland State who'd looked up to me with something dangerously close to hero worship. She'd hung on my every word during staff training, sought my advice on everything from homesick campers to the proper way to build a campfire. When I'd started sleeping with her 3 weeks into the session, I'd told myself it was mutual attraction between adults. I'd never admitted it was just another way to feel powerful in a job that left me overwhelmed and underprepared. "Sarah, do you know what I was doing when the fire started?" she asked, moving closer. Her feet made no sound on the gravel. "I was in my cabin, writing in my journal, writing about you, about us, about how I thought I might be falling in love. Stupid, 19-year-old thoughts, but they were mine. Then I smelled smoke." The flames behind her seemed to pulse in rhythm with her words, casting dancing shadows that made her face appear almost alive. Almost. "I tried to get the kids out first," she continued. "That's what you trained us to do, remember? Children first, always. But the door was already too hot to touch, and the window," she gestured to her ruined face. "The window exploded outward when I tried to break it, glass and flame all at once. I tried to find you," I whispered, though we both knew it was a lie. "No, you didn't. You got yourself out, and then you ran. You left us all to burn while you saved your own skin." Her voice carried no anger, only a terrible sadness that cut deeper than rage ever could. 7 of us died that night, Michael. 7 people who trusted you. I was just a kid myself, 18 years old, in charge of a whole camp. You were the head counselor. You were supposed to protect us. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. In the distance, I could hear other voices now calling my name. Tommy's voice, cracking on the high note the way it always did when he was nervous. Jenny's laugh, bright and musical and wrong, coming from a throat burned black. The children. God, the children. Their voices high and sweet and forever young. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Sarah smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly as she had in life. Radiant, hopeful, alive with possibility. "I want you to remember. All of it. Not just the parts that let you sleep at night." She raised her hand and touched my forehead with fingers that felt like ice, and suddenly I was back there, 20 years in the past, experiencing that night all over again. July 23rd, 2004, 11:47 p.m. I jerked awake to the sound of shouting. My counselor's quarters were on the second floor of the lodge, a small room with a slanted ceiling and a window that looked out over the lake. For a moment I lay there disoriented, trying to place the voices that had pulled me from sleep. Then I smelled smoke. I rolled out of bed and stumbled to the window. Across the compound, the arts and crafts cabin was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky like grasping fingers. Even from a distance, I could feel the heat through the glass, see the way the fire danced and writhed with unnatural fury. My first coherent thought was, this is my fault. I'd been in the arts and crafts cabin earlier that evening, showing Sarah how to properly bank the kiln after the pottery class. We'd been alone, the last activity of the day finished, the campers all supposedly in their bunks. One thing had led to another, as it had been leading for weeks, and we'd ended up tangled together on the floor behind the pottery wheels, making love with the desperate urgency of youth and borrowed time. I'd been careless with the kiln, distracted. Had I closed the door properly, checked the temperature gauge? I couldn't remember, and that uncertainty gnawed at me as I watched the cabin burn. My second thought was more practical. Get everyone out. I threw on clothes and ran downstairs shouting for Eleanor, who had her own room on the first floor. But her door was open, her bed empty. Through the lodge's front windows, I could see her standing in the compound, still in her nightgown, directing the evacuation with the calm efficiency that had made her a legend among summer camp administrators. "Michael," she called when she saw me emerge from the lodge. "Take the west side cabins. Get everyone to the parking lot. Now." The camp was chaos. 32 children between the ages of 8 and 16, roused from sleep and thrust into a nightmare. Some were crying, some were screaming, some stood frozen in shock as their safe summer haven transformed into something from their worst dreams. The counselors moved among them like sheepdogs, gathering stragglers, checking bunks, maintaining the fragile order that stood between organized evacuation and deadly panic. I ran toward the west side cabins, where the older girls were housed. Cabin 7 was closest to the fire, its pine log walls already glowing with reflected flame. I pounded on the door and pushed inside to find Jenny Hartwell trying to calm 6 13-year-olds who were convinced they were going to die. "Everyone out," I shouted. "Move, move, move." Jenny herded the girls toward the door while I checked the bathroom and under the bunks. My training kicked in: count heads, check hiding spots, maintain calm authority. 6 girls accounted for, no one left behind. I followed them out into the compound where the heat hit me like a physical blow. The fire had spread to cabin 6 and cabin 5. The wind was picking up, carrying embers across the compound like malevolent fireflies. What had started as a single building fire was becoming something much worse. "Where's Sarah?" I asked Jenny as she shepherded her girls toward the parking lot. "Cabin 4, she called back. "She's got the younger girls." Cabin 4 was directly in the fire's path. I ran. The smoke was thick now, stinging my eyes and burning my throat. The compound was a maze of panicked figures moving through orange-tinted darkness, and for a moment I lost my bearings. Then I saw Cabin 4, its windows glowing amber from within, and my heart nearly stopped. The door was closed. No sign of evacuation. No Sarah leading a line of children to safety. I reached the cabin and grabbed the door handle. The metal was hot enough to sear my palm, but I forced myself to turn it anyway. The door swung open, and I was met by a wall of flame that singed my eyebrows and sent me stumbling backward. The cabin was an inferno. The roof had already started to collapse, and I could see straight through to the burning skeleton of the building's frame. If anyone had been inside, they were dead now. Had to be. But I could hear voices, faint, desperate, calling for help. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, another window, any gap in the flames that might allow me to reach whoever was trapped inside. The back window was shattered, glass scattered on the ground, smoke pouring out in thick black clouds. I could see a figure moving inside, just a shadow, but definitely human. "Sarah!" I screamed. "Sarah, I'm here!" The shadow moved toward the window, and for a moment I thought I saw her face through the smoke. Soot-streaked but alive, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear over the roar of flame. She reached toward me, and I reached back. but there was still 6 feet of burning cabin between us. I needed something to break through the wall, a crowbar, a sledgehammer, anything. But even as I looked around desperately for tools that weren't there, I knew it was too late. The cabin was coming down, the roof sagging inward, the walls buckling under the heat. If I went in after her, we'd both die. If I stayed out here, only she would. I made my choice. I turned and ran. Not toward the cabin, not into the flames to die alongside the woman I claimed to love, but away. Toward safety. Toward the parking lot where Eleanor was taking roll call, where the fire trucks were finally arriving, where I could blend in with the other survivors and pretend I'd done everything possible. I made it 20 feet before the cabin collapsed behind me with a sound like the world ending. Present day. Sarah's touch withdrew from my forehead, leaving me gasping and shaking in the firelight. The memory was fresh as an open wound, every detail preserved in perfect, damning clarity. I remembered now what I'd spent 20 years trying to forget. The moment when I chose my own life over hers. The moment when I became the kind of person who could live with that choice. "You remember now," she said softly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. 7 of us died that night. Not because the fire was too fast or too hot or too unpredictable, because when it mattered most, the person responsible for keeping us safe decided we weren't worth saving. "I was scared," I whispered. "We were all scared, but you were supposed to be brave for us." Around us, the other figures began to move closer. Eleanor, her melted face serene in the firelight. Tommy, his guitar strings hanging like broken puppet wire. Jenny, her laugh replaced by the wheeze of smoke-damaged lungs. And the children. Oh God, the children. Their young faces bearing witness to a betrayal they'd been too innocent to understand. "What do you want from me?" I asked again. Sarah smiled, and this time there was something almost gentle in it. "The same thing we've always wanted, Michael. For you to stop running." The fire around us shifted and changed, the flames reorganizing themselves into a perfect circle with us at the center. It was like standing in the eye of a hurricane made of light and heat, a pocket of impossible calm surrounded by elemental fury. The other figures arranged themselves around the perimeter, 7 accusers facing their judge. 20 years, Eleanor said, her voice carrying the same authority it had in life, though now it came through lips that were more char than flesh. 20 years you've been telling the story your way, making yourself the hero who did everything he could, the traumatized survivor who bears no responsibility for the tragedy that befell his charges. I wanted to argue, to defend the version of events I'd constructed so carefully over the decades. But the memory Sarah had forced me to relive was too fresh, too vivid. I could still feel the heat of that door handle in my palm, still see her shadow reaching toward me through the smoke. "I wrote a book about it," I said, though the words felt like ash in my mouth. "I donated all the proceeds to burn survivors' charities. I've spoken at fire safety conferences, helped implement new evacuation protocols." "Guilt money," Tommy interrupted, his ruined vocal cords giving his voice a horrible rasp. "Blood money. You built a career on our corpses, Michael. Surviving Camp Grey Pine, a true account of tragedy and resilience." Wasn't that the title? It was. The book had been my breakthrough, the one that launched my career as a true crime writer. I'd told myself I was honoring their memory, sharing important lessons about emergency preparedness and institutional responsibility. I'd never admitted that it was really about redemption, my attempt to rewrite history, to cast myself as a hero rather than a coward. "Tell us about the interview," Jenny said, moving closer. Her burned face held none of the warmth I remembered. "The one with 60 Minutes. What did you say about Sarah?" I closed my eyes, but the memory came anyway. Leslie Stahl sitting across from me in my Manhattan apartment, the cameras rolling, America watching as I played the part of the grief-stricken survivor who'd lost the woman he loved. "I said she died trying to save the children in her cabin," I whispered. "And what did you leave out? That she was there because of me, that I was supposed to check her cabin, that the words stuck in my throat like broken glass. That you chose yourself over all of us," Sarah finished gently. "That you had the chance to save us and walked away instead." The fire around us pulsed brighter, and I could see other scenes playing in the flames. Moments from the past 20 years when I could have told the truth and chose lies instead. The book tour interviews where I painted myself as a hero. The keynote speeches at safety conferences where I accepted praise for lessons learned in blood. The grief counseling sessions where I'd wept crocodile tears for the woman I'd abandoned to die. "You want to know the worst part?" Tommy said, stepping closer. "It's not that you left us to burn. People panic. People make mistakes. That's human. The worst part is that you've spent 20 years profiting from our deaths while pretending to be the victim." "You never meant to get caught," Eleanor corrected. "You never meant for anyone to know the truth. You built your whole life on a lie, Michael, and now that lie is eating you alive from the inside." She was right. I could feel it now. The cancer of deception that had been growing in me for 2 decades. Every interview, every speaking engagement, every moment of undeserved sympathy had fed the tumor until it consumed everything genuine about me. I'd become a hollow man filled with other people's pain, a fraud who'd forgotten how to exist without lies. "What do you want from me?" I asked for the 3rd time. "Justice," said a small voice. One of the children stepped forward, a boy of maybe 10, his Camp Grey Pine t-shirt charred black, his young face bearing burns that should have killed him. I remembered him. Danny Kowalski from Portland, a quiet kid who'd been terrified of the dark. He'd been sleeping in cabin 4 when the fire started. "We've been waiting here for 20 years, Danny continued in his piping child's voice. "Waiting for you to come back and face what you did. Waiting for you to stop lying and tell the truth." "What truth?" "Everyone knows what happened that night." "No," Sarah interrupted. "They know your version. They know the story you've been telling for 20 years. But they don't know what really happened in those last moments. They don't know about the choice you made." The fire around us began to contract, the circle growing smaller, the heat more intense. For the first time since returning to the camp, I felt the flame's warmth on my skin. Not painful, but insistent, like a fever burning away infection. "Tell them," Eleanor commanded, her melted features stern with authority. "Tell them all what really happened that night. No more lies, no more half-truths, no more carefully crafted narratives designed to make you look like anything other than what you are." "And what am I?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "A coward," Sarah said simply. "A man who chose his own life over the lives of 7 people who trusted him. A killer who spent 20 years hiding behind good intentions and charitable donations." The word hung in the air between us like a physical thing. Killer, not murderer. I hadn't set the fire, hadn't intended for anyone to die, but I'd made the choice that ensured they would. The choice that turned tragedy into atrocity through the simple act of walking away. "I can't," I whispered. "If I tell the truth, It'll destroy everything. My career, my reputation, my life." "Your life?" Tommy laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What about our lives? What about the children who died because their head counselor was too scared to do his job?" The fire pressed closer, and I could smell my own hair beginning to singe. The heat was becoming unbearable, but I knew instinctively that it would stop just short of killing me. This was judgment, not execution. They wanted me to live with the truth, not die with my lies. "Choose," Sarah said, extending her burned hand toward me. "You can walk away again, run back to your comfortable life built on our graves. Or you can stay and face what you've done, tell the truth, and accept the consequences." I looked around the circle of accusers, these 7 souls I'd condemned to eternal fire through my cowardice. They stared back with eyes that held no hatred, only infinite sadness. They'd been waiting 20 years for this moment, 20 years for me to find the courage I'd lacked when they needed it most. The choice was mine, just as it had been that night. I could run again, flee back to New York and my book deals and speaking engagements, continue living the lie that had sustained me for 2 decades. Or I could finally do what I should have done 20 years ago, put their needs above my own fear. I reached out and took Sarah's hand. Her burned fingers felt solid and warm, more real than anything I'd touched in years. The moment our skin made contact, the fire around us exploded outward, consuming the night, consuming the camp, consuming everything except the truth that had been waiting here in the darkness for someone brave enough to speak it. The fire transported me not through space, but through time, carrying me forward 20 years in the space between one heartbeat and the next. I stood in a television studio in Manhattan, harsh lights beating down on me as I faced a bank of cameras and a very familiar interviewer. But this wasn't a memory. Anderson Cooper sat across from me, his silver hair perfect under the studio lights, his expression professionally neutral but tinged with something that might have been disgust. Behind him, a large screen displayed the now familiar photographs from Camp Gray Pine. The 7 victims arranged in a grid, their young faces smiling out at America with the heartbreaking innocence of the doomed. "With me now is Michael Harrison," Cooper was saying, author of the best-selling memoir Surviving Camp Gray Pine, and a man who, until this week, was considered a hero by many. "Mr. Harrison, you've called this press conference to make what you describe as an important correction of the historical record. The floor is yours." I looked directly into the camera, my throat dry as sand. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights, I could sense their presence. Sarah and the others watching, waiting to see if I would finally tell the truth. 20 years ago, I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected. 7 people died in a fire at Camp Gray Pine in Oregon. I was the head counselor, responsible for their safety. For the past 2 decades, I've told the world that I did everything I could to save them. That's a lie. Cooper leaned forward slightly, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine surprise. This wasn't the prepared statement his producers had been expecting. "The truth is simpler and more damning," I continued. "When the fire started, I had the chance to save Sarah Kellerman and the 4 children trapped in cabin 4. I chose not to take that chance because I was afraid of dying. I left them to burn while I saved myself." The studio was dead silent except for the hum of cameras and the distant sound of traffic on the Manhattan streets outside. Cooper recovered his composure first. "Mr. Harrison, that's a very serious allegation to make against yourself. Are you saying you deliberately allowed these people to die?" "I'm saying I made a choice," I replied. When faced with the decision between risking my life to save theirs or preserving my own safety, I chose self-preservation. I told myself it was too late, that they were already dead, that going in after them would accomplish nothing except adding another victim to the count. But the truth is, I don't know if they were dead. I don't know if I could have saved them. I only know that I didn't try. The camera pushed in closer, capturing every detail of my face as I destroyed the carefully constructed narrative that had defined my adult life. I could feel the weight of 20 years of lies lifting from my shoulders, replaced by something heavier but cleaner, the burden of truth. "Why are you telling us this now?" Cooper asked. I thought of Sarah's hand in mine, of the fire that had burned for 20 years waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Because they deserve better than the lie I've been telling. Because the families of the victims deserve to know what really happened to their children. Because I've spent 20 years running from the truth, and I'm tired of being a coward. Are you prepared for the legal ramifications of this confession? Your statement could potentially open you up to criminal charges, wrongful death lawsuits. Yes, I said simply. I'm prepared for whatever consequences come from telling the truth. I should have been prepared for them 20 years ago. Cooper turned to the camera. We'll be right back after this commercial break with more from Michael Harrison, whose stunning confession is sure to rewrite the narrative of one of the Pacific Northwest's most tragic disasters. As the lights dimmed and the stage managers moved in to reset for the next segment, I felt a familiar presence beside me. Sarah materialized in the chair next to Cooper's, visible only to me, her burned face peaceful in the studio lights. "That was a good start," she said softly. "Just a start?" "Telling the truth to a television audience is easy, Michael. Living with the consequences, that's where the real work begins." She was right, of course. The interview was just the beginning. In the days and weeks that followed, my world would unravel with spectacular thoroughness. The book would be pulled from shelves, speaking engagements canceled, lawsuits filed. The families of the victims would have their say, and it wouldn't be kind. I would lose everything I'd built on the foundation of their deaths, but I would still be alive to lose it, which was more than I could say for the 7 souls who'd waited 20 years for this moment. "Will it be enough?" I asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since I'd seen her in the lodge, she looked truly at peace. "It's a beginning. The rest is up to you." 6 months later, I stood at the edge of Mirror Lake as the demolition crews finished their work. The cabins were gone, reduced to neat piles of lumber and debris. The main lodge had been the last to fall, its massive stone chimney finally toppling under the weight of heavy machinery and time. Only the foundation remained, a rectangular scar in the earth that would soon be covered by new growth. The intervening months had been exactly as brutal as Sarah had predicted. The CNN interview had triggered an avalanche of consequences that buried my old life completely. The book was pulled from circulation within hours, my publisher citing factual inaccuracies and breach of contract in their tersely worded statement. Speaking engagements were canceled, awards revoked, honorary degrees rescinded. The University of Oregon, which had given me an honorary doctorate in journalism, publicly announced they were reviewing their decision. But it was the families that hit hardest. David Kellerman, Sarah's father, had called me a murderer on Good Morning America, his voice breaking as he held up a photograph of his daughter on her 19th birthday. "She trusted him," he'd said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "We all trusted him to keep her safe, and he left her to die. Then he spent 20 years lying about it, making money off our grief. The Kowalski family had filed a wrongful death lawsuit within a week of my confession. The Hartwell family followed suit 2 days later. By the end of the month, I was facing 7 separate civil actions seeking damages that would have bankrupted me even if I'd had money left to lose. Which I didn't. My assets had been frozen pending the legal proceedings, my bank accounts emptied by attorney's fees and court costs. I'd been forced to sell my Manhattan apartment, my car, everything of value I owned. I was living in a studio apartment in Queens, working as a night janitor at an office building in Midtown, trying to figure out how to exist as the person I'd always been underneath the lies. It was strangely liberating. The criminal investigation had been more complex. The Oregon State Police had reopened the case, interviewing surviving witnesses, reviewing evidence, consulting with fire experts and legal scholars. In the end, the statute of limitations protected me from prosecution. You can't charge someone with a 20-year-old crime of omission, no matter how morally reprehensible. But the lead investigator, Detective Sarah Baines, the irony of the name wasn't lost on me, had made her opinion clear in a leaked report. Michael Harrison's actions on the night of July 23, 2004, constitute criminal negligence resulting in death. If we could prosecute, we would. The media circus had been relentless for the first few months. Reporters camped outside my apartment building, followed me to work, ambushed me at grocery stores and laundromats. They wanted to know why I'd lied, what had driven me to finally confess, whether I felt remorse for my actions. I'd stopped answering their questions after the first week, let my lawyer handle the statements and press releases. What was there to say that I hadn't already said? I was guilty. I was sorry. I would spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for something that could never truly be forgiven. Gradually, the attention had faded as newer scandals captured the public imagination. But the internet never forgets, and my name would forever be linked with cowardice and betrayal. Future employers would Google me and find the mugshot-style photographs that had run with every news story. Dating apps would match me with women who'd recognize my face from true crime documentaries. I would carry the mark of my confession until the day I died, and maybe that was appropriate. Now, watching the last traces of Camp Grey Pine disappear under the demolition crew's methodical destruction, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years. Peace. "It's really gone," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Eleanor approaching along the lake shore. But this Eleanor was different from the burned specter I'd encountered 6 months ago. She looked exactly as I remembered her in life, silver hair pulled back in her perpetual bun, wearing practical hiking boots and a wool sweater despite the summer heat. Her face was whole, unmarked by flame, creased with the lines of a life well lived. "Eleanor," I said, not entirely surprised to see her. "I was wondering if you'd come. Couldn't miss the grand finale," she replied, settling onto a fallen log beside the water. "Besides, I wanted to see how you were doing. The others were worried." The others. As if summoned by her words, they began to appear along the shoreline. Sarah emerged from between 2 pine trees, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight, her face radiant with life and unmarked by fire. Tommy materialized near the dock, his guitar slung over his shoulder, fingers already picking out a gentle melody. Jenny appeared at the water's edge, laughing at something only she could hear. And the children, God, the children, came running across the compound as if called to afternoon activities, their voices bright with joy. All of them whole, all of them at peace. "We wanted to say goodbye," Sarah explained, moving to stand beside me. "And thank you. Thank me? For what? For finally telling the truth, for giving us justice, even when it cost you everything." She smiled, and it was the same radiant expression I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Do you know what it's like to be trapped by someone else's lie? To have your death reduced to a convenient fiction? We've been waiting 20 years for someone to acknowledge what really happened that night." Tommy approached, his music weaving between the words like a soundtrack to reconciliation. "You could have kept lying," he said. "Could have taken the secret to your grave and let us burn here forever. But you chose truth over comfort. That takes a different kind of courage than we needed that night, but it's courage all the same." "I destroyed my life," I said. "You destroyed a life built on lies," Eleanor corrected. "What you do with the truth, that's up to you now." One of the children, little Danny Kowalski, his young face bright with forgiveness, tugged at my shirt. "Are you gonna be okay, Mr. Michael?" I knelt down to his level, this boy who'd died because of my cowardice, who had every right to hate me forever. "I don't know, Danny. I hope so." "We think you will be," he said with the certainty that only children possess. "You're not the same person who left us in the fire. That person was scared and selfish. You're different now." He was right. The man who'd fled Camp Gray Pine 20 years ago, the one who'd built a career on other people's graves, was as dead as the 7 souls standing around me. What remained was something smaller but more honest, a middle-aged janitor who'd finally learned the weight of truth. "What happens now?" I asked Sarah. "Now you live," she said simply. "You wake up every morning and choose to be better than you were the day before. You carry us with you, not as guilt, but as responsibility. You make sure our deaths meant something by becoming the person you should have been all along." The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the lake in shades of gold and crimson. The demolition crews had finished their work and departed, leaving behind only clean earth and the promise of new growth. In a year or two, the forest would reclaim this space, erasing the last physical traces of Camp Gray Pine. But the memories would remain, not the false ones I'd created, but the true ones I'd finally found the courage to share. "Will I see you again?" I asked. Sarah shook her head, her expression peaceful. "We're done here, Michael. We've been holding on for 20 years, waiting for justice, waiting for truth. Now we can rest." One by one, they began to fade. Not burning away as they had in my nightmares, but simply becoming transparent, then gossamer, then memory. Tommy's guitar music lingered longest, a gentle melody that spoke of forgiveness and second chances. Jenny's laugh echoed across the water like the cry of a loon. The children's voices rose in harmony, singing an old camp song about friendship and adventures yet to come. Eleanor was the last to go. She stood beside me as the others faded into the gathering dusk, her presence solid and reassuring. "I failed you," I said. "Yes," she agreed, "but failure isn't the end of the story unless you make it the end. You have years ahead of you, Michael. Decades, if you're lucky. What are you going to do with them?" I thought about the question as she began to fade, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. What was I going to do with the rest of my life? I couldn't undo the past, couldn't bring back the dead, couldn't erase the 20 years of lies that had defined my adult existence. But I could choose who to be going forward. "I'm going to try to be worthy of their forgiveness," I said. Eleanor smiled, her face already translucent against the darkening sky. "That's all any of us can do," and then she was gone, leaving me alone beside the lake as full darkness settled over the valley. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. For the first time in 20 years, I had nothing to hide from. 5 years after Camp Gray Pine was demolished, I returned to the valley one last time. The forest had indeed reclaimed the space, young saplings growing where cabins once stood, wildflowers blooming in the meadow that had once been the compound. A small memorial plaque marked the spot where the main lodge had stood, listing the names of the 7 victims and the simple inscription, "Their lives mattered. Their deaths will not be forgotten." I'd paid for the memorial with money earned from my job at the community college. Not as a professor this time, but as a groundskeeper. It was honest work, physical work that left me too tired for nightmares and too busy for self-pity. I lived in a small apartment above a coffee shop in Salem, Oregon, close enough to visit the memorial when the anniversary came around, but far enough from my old life to start fresh. The lawsuits had been settled years ago, my remaining assets distributed among the families of the victims. I would be paying restitution for the rest of my life, but that seemed appropriate. Some debts can never be fully repaid. I still got recognized sometimes. My face had been too widely broadcast for complete anonymity. But the recognition came less frequently now, and when it did, it was often accompanied not by anger but by a grudging respect. The man who'd confessed to his own cowardice on national television had become something of an unlikely folk hero to some people, a symbol of the possibility of redemption through truth-telling. I wasn't sure I deserved that kind of admiration, but I'd learned to accept it with the same grace I'd learned to accept condemnation. Both were part of the consequences of my choices, the old choice to lie and the newer choice to tell the truth. Standing beside Mirror Lake in the fading daylight, I felt their presence one more time, not as accusers or ghosts, but as companions on the long journey toward whatever came next. Sarah's hand seemed to rest on my shoulder for just a moment, warm and forgiving. Tommy's music drifted on the evening breeze, a lullaby for the living. Eleanor's voice whispered in the rustle of pine needles, "The rest is up to you now." I knelt beside the memorial plaque and placed 7 white roses at its base, one for each of the victims, one for each year since I'd finally found the courage to tell the truth. Then I stood and walked back to my car, leaving the dead to their well-earned rest and the living to figure out how to carry on. The fire at Camp Gray Pine had finally stopped burning. After 25 years, the flames had been extinguished not by water or foam or time, but by the simple act of speaking their names and acknowledging their worth. They were gone now, truly gone, free to move on to whatever waited beyond the veil of memory and guilt. And I was free too, free to live with the truth, free to be the person I should have been all along, free to spend whatever years remained to me in service to something larger than my own fear. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I first returned to Camp Gray Pine, but it was the ending we all deserved. Sometimes the most important fires are the ones that burn away everything false, leaving only what's real and true and worth preserving. The road ahead was dark, but I wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. I had learned to carry my own light,